My rich, snobby classmate picked me in the prom draft, and the principal insisted I attend with him due to his family's status. I complied and went along with it, but then I ended up humiliating him and tarnishing his reputation. Picture being chosen for prom like a fantasy football draft, only you're not a player. You're the prize. I attend this small private high school where basically everything is dictated by wealth. If your family doesn't drive a luxury vehicle, contribute to the school, or escape to private islands for holidays, you're pretty much invisible. Every year, prom is a monumental event. People invest months planning for it, while parents host extravagant pre-prom parties, and you better believe that everyone sizes each other up based on their dates, dresses, and arrival cars. This year, though, things got strange. About a month ahead of prom, I began hearing murmurs about something they called the prom draft. At first, I dismissed it as a silly rumor or joke, but soon it grew louder and turned out to be entirely real. Essentially, the most popular guys at school organized a secret draft, like fantasy football, to choose which girls they would invite to prom, treating girls as if they were trading cards. I didn't think this would involve me. I didn't hang out with the popular crowd and hadn't planned on going to prom with any of them. But then I discovered I had been drafted, not by just anyone, but by Jason. If you went to my school, you would know exactly who Jason was. His family was incredibly wealthy. I'm talking about private jets, designer everything, and a massive mansion. Essentially, his family runs the school, donating so much that the administration treats them like royalty. Consequently, Jason waltzes around as if he owns the place. He's the sort of guy who believes he's superior to everyone just because his family has more money than they know what to do with. One day, Mrs. Beckett, our chemistry teacher, had had enough of Jason's usual behavior. He had been making snide remarks throughout class, laughing with his friends, and completely ignoring her lecture. But that day, Mrs. Beckett snapped. She told Jason to stay after class. Jason rolled his eyes but didn't argue. He remained while everyone else left, and I wasn't inclined to linger, though a group of students hung around in the hallway pretending to take their time with their books. Maya nudged me and whispered, asking if I thought anything would actually happen this time. We both knew the answer. A few minutes later, the classroom door flew open and Jason stormed out. Although I didn't catch every word, I did hear Mrs. Beckett say something like, "You're still accountable for your actions." Everyone went silent, and Jason glared at her through the doorway, telling her she would regret talking to him that way, and spat at her before storming down the hall. The following morning, however, it felt as if nothing had happened. In fact, Mrs. Beckett seemed almost kinder to Jason. He walked into class with his usual swagger, smirking as if he hadn't been reprimanded less than 24 hours earlier. The tension from the previous day was completely erased. It didn't take long for rumors to circulate. Word was that Jason's parents had spoken with the administration, and more importantly, had provided Mrs. Beckett with a generous donation to her favored charity, which we all knew was herself. Many whispered about it, but no one dared to speak too loudly. That afternoon, Jason reverted to his old self, sitting at the back of the class, tossing paper wads and making smart remarks. Mrs. Beckett didn't say a word. She didn't even glance in his direction when he laughed too loud or interrupted her. Now, it seemed Jason had the first pick in the draft. Naturally, he bought it. Yes, he bribed some of the guys organizing it to secure that top pick, and guess who he chose? I don't mean that in a flattering way. Jason didn't pick me because he liked me or believed we'd have a good time together. He selected me because in his eyes I was just a trophy. I suppose he thought I was attractive enough to flaunt at prom. Most of the other girls fawned over Jason, while I recognized what he was about and ignored him in class. I never laughed at his jokes or offered him a pencil when he needed it, and that's what intrigued him. He relished the chase. Trust me, I understood this wasn't about personality. Jason had never exchanged more than 5 words with me before this. He was your typical rich, snobby kid, showing up to school in his flashy car, dressed in clothes that probably cost more than my rent. He's the type to casually mention his family's vacations to private islands and boasts about how his parents donate to the school, as if he's doing everyone a favor. When Jason learned I wasn't exactly thrilled about being his choice, he didn't take it well. He began acting like I owed him a prom date simply because he selected me in this ludicrous draft. He'd find ways to bump into me in the hallways, making comments like, "I can't wait to see you in your dress," or "We'll look amazing together at prom." I tried to steer clear of him, but Jason made it impossible. He'd corner me after class, and even when I tried expressing disinterest, he just laughed it off as if I were joking. He treated me as if I was already his date. It was as though, in his mind, I had no choice. Here's where it gets worse. It wasn't just Jason pressuring me. The school started getting involved. One day, I was summoned to the principal's office. I assumed it was about something significant, perhaps a school project, but no. The principal sat me down and, in a grave tone, discussed how I should think about attending prom with Jason. She didn't outright say it, but she heavily hinted that his family wanted to keep him content, and this was their plan. I realized she was only saying this so his family could keep paying them off, but I still couldn't believe what I was hearing. Since when was it my responsibility to ensure some spoiled rich kid had a good prom night? After that meeting with the principal, a couple of my teachers chimed in too. One day during class, my history teacher made a casual remark about how it would be such an honor for any girl to go to prom with Jason, considering how much his family contributes to the school. I just sat there, shocked. My friends attempted to be supportive, but even they began suggesting I should just go with Jason to avoid drama. It's just one night, they insisted. What's the big deal? The only girls who were less than thrilled about Jason picking me were those in his inner circle. They had their own table in the cafeteria, centrally located where they always sat with perfect posture, as if posing for some magazine cover. They were the ones with custom uniforms, somehow managing to dodge the dress code while flaunting their designer handbags and jewelry. Ever since Jason drafted me, they'd been giving me dirty looks every time I passed by. Initially subtle, their glaring stares became harder to ignore as prom approached. During lunch, they'd huddle together at their table, whispering and laughing, and I'd catch them glancing in my direction. One of them, Tessa, would flash this nasty little smirk every time our eyes met, as if she knew something I didn't. The moment I looked back, however, they would all turn around and pretend nothing had happened, as if their whispers didn't revolve around me. It was maddening. I'd sit down at my table, feeling their eyes boring into the back of my head, knowing they were likely tearing me apart. Sometimes, I could hear bits and pieces of what they were saying. Of course, they'd never say it to my face. They preferred making me feel like an outsider, like I didn't belong in Jason's world. Even though my friends claimed it didn't matter, it was a huge deal to me. I didn't want to be forced into going to prom with someone I barely knew, let alone someone who treated me like a prize he had won in some game. Yet, the pressure continued to mount. It felt as though the entire school had allied with Jason, and I was the difficult one for not just acquiescing. Before all this started, I had never really been the type of girl to focus excessively on my appearance. I wore the same uniform as everyone else, a plain plaid skirt, a white blouse, and a blazer. But for some reason, it felt like I couldn't walk down a hallway without being called out. It happened almost every day. "Fix your blouse," one teacher would say, looking at me disapprovingly as if I had altered my uniform to make it more revealing. But I hadn't changed anything. It was the exact shirt every other girl in the school wore, yet somehow when I wore it, it became a problem. One day, Mrs. Turner, who never spoke to any of the other girls, pulled me aside as I was heading to class and told me my skirt was a bit too short while sizing me up. I was taken aback. My skirt was exactly the same length it had always been since I started attending this school. They made it seem as if my version of the uniform consistently breached the dress code, even when it was entirely acceptable on everyone else. I never tried to stand out, but somehow I always did. Monday rolled around, and of course, everyone was talking about what had happened. Jason's parents were furious and tried to stir up trouble with the school, but honestly, I didn't care anymore. I went to the principal's office and filed a complaint against Jason for how he treated me. I didn't expect much to come of it, but I needed to stand up for myself, even if the administration was still trying to protect Jason's family's reputation. Surprisingly, some of the teachers who had pressured me into going with Jason actually admitted they were wrong. I guess word spread fast about how controlling Jason had been, and suddenly people were beginning to realize how messed up the whole situation was. As for Jason, he didn't apologize. He spent the next few weeks sulking around school, complaining to anyone who would listen about how I ruined his prom night. But here's the thing. Jason's social status began to crumble. People were finally seeing him for what he really was, an entitled, spoiled brat who thought his money could buy anything, even people. And while his family still held their grip on the school, Jason wasn't as untouchable as he used to be.
My dad kept insisting I attend his wedding with his affair partner, so I revealed the dark truth about what they did to my mom. I'm a 19-year-old male, just a few months into my first year of community college. Life at home used to be stable, a simple routine shared with my mother and father, but everything shifted last year when my father announced he had been unhappy for years and abruptly moved out. I soon found out that he had been having an affair with a woman he met through work. My mother was devastated, and I was furious at how callously he discarded our family. Following a messy divorce, my mother got the house, but she was emotionally crushed by the betrayal. Meanwhile, my father moved into an upscale apartment with his affair partner. As if that wasn't enough, 3 weeks ago, he decided to inform me he was marrying this woman. He delivered the news as if it were some grand blessing and insisted that I had to attend the wedding. "You're my son, and you will be there," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I sat across from him, silently seething. Did he really think I'd celebrate his new marriage to the person who helped destroy my mother's heart? Initially, I tried to decline. Politely, I said, "Look, I don't want to cause tension, but I'm not comfortable attending the wedding. He waved that off as if I were a disobedient child. This isn't about your comfort, it's about family. He barked. The hypocrisy stung. He had broken our family and replaced it with one that suited his own desires. And then he had the nerve to demand I play the role of supportive son. Over the next week, the pressure he put on me intensified. He texted, called, and left voicemails filled with guilt trips. Occasionally, he would swing by my mother's house, where I still lived, to lecture me face to face. Sometimes, his fiancée joined him, wearing a smug grin as if she was winning a competition. She'd say things like, "We want you to be happy for us," with a tone that suggested anything but sincerity. Once, she even tried to pat me on the shoulder in a strange display of false affection. I pulled away, telling her I wasn't interested in being friendly. That's when they resorted to underhanded tactics. My father threatened to freeze my college fund if I didn't comply. "You're ungrateful," he spat during one particularly tense conversation. "After all I've done for you, the least you can do is show up for one day." He then mentioned wanting me in the wedding photographs to maintain the image of a united family. It was all so manipulative. I knew I had to push back, yet I felt trapped. He held financial power over me, and if he cut off my college funding, I wouldn't be able to pay my tuition next semester. I agonized for days about it, discussing my dilemma with my mother. She didn't have the means to cover my tuition, but refused to see me strong-armed into attending. She said, "If you want to stand up for yourself, do it. We'll figure out tuition somehow." Her support strengthened my resolve, and yet, beneath my anger, I felt a growing need for justice. To make them realize they couldn't steamroll me and that their behavior was unacceptable. That opportunity arrived sooner than I anticipated. A friend of mine who had witnessed the affair from the sidelines mentioned something explosive. Apparently, my father and his fiancée had orchestrated a deliberate plot to isolate my mother by spreading rumors about her mental health at my father's workplace, framing himself as the victim. They painted my mother as unstable, which made my father's affairs seem like a necessary escape rather than a betrayal. That vicious lie led many of my father's co-workers to sympathize with him. Fueled by this new information, I resolved to do more than just refuse the wedding invitation. I was going to expose them openly in a way they'd never forget. A week before the wedding, the tension boiled over. My father pulled into our driveway, marched up to the porch, and demanded an answer. "Are you coming or not?" His fiancée loomed in the background, arms crossed, sneering as if she had already won. I stood there, feeling my heart pound, knowing I had a plan, but still unsure how far to press it. With a steady breath, I said, "I'd be there on one condition. He'd have to stop threatening me over my college fund." He smirked, visibly relieved. "That's all you needed to say." "Good, I'll wire more money into your account next week," he responded, turning smugly to his fiancée. "See? I told you he'd come around." She gave me a condescending look, as if she believed I had finally accepted their twisted narrative. I stood in silence, letting them think they had cornered me into submission. But inside, I was preparing my final move. Wedding day arrived. It took place in a lovely garden venue dotted with pastel flowers and white chairs. A small crowd gathered, friends, co-workers who had bought into his sob story, and a few extended family members who either didn't know or didn't care about the betrayal. My father wore a beaming grin, strutting around in a tailored suit, while his fiancée glowed in a lacy white gown. They looked like the picture of a blissful couple. I lingered at the sidelines, wearing a plain black suit, my tie feeling too tight. Every second in that place churned my stomach, but I focused on what I was about to do. During the ceremony, the officiant asked if anyone objected to their union. A stereotypical moment most people treat as a joke, but I stepped forward. The crowd hushed, and my father looked at me with wide eyes, shocked. He hissed, "What are you doing?" My hands trembled slightly. My heart hammered, but I pushed forward, my voice clear. "I object because this marriage is built on lies." Gasps rippled through the guests, and my father's fiancée stiffened, her expression darkening. My father tried to cut me off, but I spoke louder, projecting so everyone could hear. "You both destroyed my mother by lying, cheating, and then fabricating stories about her. He claims she was the one who was unfaithful, but guess what? He's the cheater who spread rumors at his workplace, telling people she was mentally unstable to justify his affair." The hush transformed into horrified murmurs. Some jaws dropped. The officiant looked at me, unsure how to proceed. My father's fiancée lunged forward, attempting to yank the microphone from me, but I held firm and continued. "You even threatened to pull my college fund if I didn't come here to fake support. Did you think I'd stay silent forever?" She glared at me with venom, hissing, "You ungrateful brat." My father attempted to regain composure, but the damage was done. I had exposed the darkest part of their deception right there in front of all their so-called supporters. My father's co-workers exchanged glances, suddenly realizing they had been fed a pack of lies. A distant relative of ours covered her mouth in shock. The tension in the air was electric, filled with disbelief. I noticed the officiant quietly step back, wanting no part of the drama as I finished. I locked eyes with my father, who stood frozen in embarrassment. He bared his teeth, whispering, "You'll regret this," but I no longer cared about his threats. My chest felt lighter. The flurry of whispers and phone cameras pointed at us confirmed the spectacle was well underway. Finally, my father's fiancée found her voice, screeching at me for ruining her big day, calling me selfish. My father tried to salvage the situation, barking at the guests to remain seated, insisting we had a family misunderstanding, but it was too late. Many guests began rising, stepping away, not wanting to be part of this twisted ceremony. Within minutes, what should have been a neat, picture-perfect event devolved into chaos. I quietly stepped aside, allowing them to flounder amid the wreckage of their exposed lies. As I walked away from the altar area, my phone buzzed with messages from relatives who had seen or heard the outburst in real time. Some offered congratulations for speaking up, while others, presumably my father's allies, called me disrespectful or heartless. I slipped into a side path of the garden, refusing to answer any calls. I needed to process the adrenaline still coursing through me. Suddenly, I heard my father's voice behind me, low and seething. "Stop right there." He grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. He accused me of ruining his life, threatened once again to cut off my tuition, and even said he'd sue me for defamation if I ever repeated those claims. I refused to buckle. "Go ahead," I spat back. "You'll have to prove in court that you didn't spread rumors about my mother. I have enough witnesses, plus documents from her lawyer, detailing your workplace gossip. You think this will end well for you?" He hesitated, a flicker of fear crossing his face. He knew I was serious. His fiancée then stomped up, shrieking that she'd pressed charges for emotional distress. She demanded an apology, calling me names. I just stared at her, unmoved. "You kept pushing me to come here. Now, you have your answer?" That's when my father tried one final intimidation tactic, stepping closer, his voice dripping with malice. "You'll never see a dime from me again. I'll make sure you and your mother regret this." I felt a surge of righteous anger. "You already broke this family," I said, meeting his gaze coldly. "You threatened me into coming. You lied about my mother's mental health. Now the truth's out. You have no power left here." Meanwhile, guests were scattering. Some approached us worriedly, others drifted away, not wanting to be involved. A friend of my father's fiancée tried to calm her down, but she shrugged him off. A small group circled, phones raised, capturing the meltdown. My father realized the scene was being recorded. He turned away, cursing under his breath. A security guard from the venue appeared, gently suggesting we move this confrontation outside. My father barked at him to mind his own business, but the guard persisted, warning that if we didn't de-escalate, he'd call the authorities. I took the opportunity to slip away, heading toward the parking lot. My father yelled after me, something about how I'd regret crossing him. I tuned him out, focusing on the relief that now weighed on my heart. It felt liberating to shine a light on their lies in front of all the people they tried to impress. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed with new messages. Word had already spread. A coworker of my father's texted me, saying, "Wow, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Let me know if your mother needs help clarifying anything at work." Another relative wrote, "This is insane. I wish your father had told the truth from the beginning." For the first time in months, I sensed genuine support from people who had previously believed my father's narrative. When I got home, my mother was waiting. She didn't attend the wedding, of course, but I had texted her a brief warning about what I was about to do. She looked anxious as I recounted the story step by step. Despite her shock, she hugged me, whispering that she was proud I stood up for her. We spent the evening processing everything. She worried about my father's threats, but I assured her I had documented proof, emails, statements, and a draft from my mother's lawyer about the rumors my father spread. If he tried anything, we'd be ready. We both felt a surge of courage we hadn't experienced since the divorce began. Over the next few days, the fallout from the wedding fiasco was colossal. Photos and videos from the event spread among my father's friends and coworkers. He tried to spin the story as me being a vindictive child manipulated by my mother, but too many people had heard the truth. Some still sided with him, but he lost a significant portion of his support base at work. According to one of my relatives, my father's new wife was humiliated beyond words. She canceled what was supposed to be their honeymoon trip, furious that her big day was overshadowed by scandal. My father did attempt to freeze my college fund. True to his word, he withdrew the money from the account he set up for me. But my mother and I had been expecting this. We reached out to a local community organization that offered scholarships for kids from broken families. Thanks to my decent grades, I managed to secure enough funding to stay in school. The rest we pieced together from my mother's part-time job and a small grant. It wasn't easy, but we made do. Meanwhile, my father's threats of suing my mother or me never materialized. His own legal counsel likely warned him that it would do more harm than good to relitigate an obvious affair and defamation allegations in public court records. Months later, my father's new marriage settled into an uneasy routine. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he and his wife still blamed me for ruining their perfect wedding, claiming I attacked them out of spite. However, that same mutual acquaintance also told me that my father's workplace had launched a quiet investigation into his conduct. Though I'm not sure of the details, reportedly he was passed over for a promotion he had been vying for. It seemed that management didn't appreciate an employee airing personal dramas and slandering others in the office. My life, on the other hand, feels more authentic. I don't pretend to respect a man who betrayed us. Yes, money's tighter now, but my mother and I have rediscovered what it means to stand by each other. The community college route might be longer, but I take pride in paying my way, bit by bit. Whenever I reflect on my father's meltdown, I realize I'd do it all over again if given the chance. Sure, it was dramatic to object at the wedding, and I'll acknowledge it was petty, but he left me no choice, cornering me with financial threats. By exposing the dark truth about what they did to my mother, I took back control. I refused to let him rewrite history and parade around like a saint while marrying his soulmate. The price for telling the truth was high, but seeing my father and his new wife furious and humiliated, that was the closure I needed. My mother-in-law ridiculed me for being merely a secretary at her ideal company. She flaunted her application for a CEO position. When I walked into the interview, I revealed, "Actually, I'm the owner." And she almost fainted when she realized who genuinely held power over her fate. Concealing my success was never my intention. Coming from a humble Boston family, I learned at an early age that perseverance and humility were more significant than status. My father, a mechanic, would come home with grease-stained hands and a tired smile, while my mother worked consecutive shifts as a nurse, committed to putting me through college. "Emily," she would often say, "success isn't determined by what you have. It's about who you are." Those words have stayed with me. By 23, I had launched a tech consulting firm from my garage. Within 2 years, it evolved into M-Tech Solutions, now valued at over $200 million. Despite this growth, I maintained a low profile, enjoying the quiet fulfillment of working behind the scenes. Then I met Michael. Our encounter occurred at a coffee shop in the neighborhood. I was focused on contracts in my typical jeans and a sweater when he unintentionally knocked over my coffee. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," he exclaimed, trying to salvage my paperwork. I couldn't help but chuckle. "It's fine," I assured him, even though those documents were acquisition agreements valued at $1 million. His authentic panic was somewhat charming. "Let me make it up to you," he insisted. "I'm Michael, by the way." "Emily," I replied with a smile. "And sure, I'll take you up on that coffee." What began as a coffee soon turned into dinner, and dinner blossomed into a relationship. Michael was unlike anyone I had ever met, kind, down-to-earth, and a high school teacher who genuinely adored his profession. He never inquired about my wealth, primarily because he was unaware of it. I told him I worked as an executive assistant at M-Tech Solutions. While not entirely false, I was overseeing administrative tasks as the company's owner, not an assistant. I wanted to be cherished for who I am, rather than what I possess. Everything was idyllic until I met his mother, Victoria Patterson. She epitomized social ambition, with her home adorned with imitation designer items, and her discussions often centered on fictional ties to high society. From our very first dinner, she dismissed me. A secretary?" she asked sharply. "Michael, darling, wasn't there a surgeon's daughter I introduced you to?" Michael, looking visibly annoyed, responded, but she persisted. "Considering our family status, you should aspire to something greater. The Pattersons have always made advantageous marriages." I couldn't help but see the irony, as Michael had already revealed their middle-class life, shored up by credit card debt and appearances. "I enjoy my job," I replied simply. "It's fulfilling." Victoria sniffed in disdain. "Well, I suppose someone has to do those things." Her passive-aggressive comments became a staple at family gatherings. While everyone else received thoughtful gifts, I was given a basic office planner. "For keeping your boss's schedule," she smirked. Michael frequently offered private apologies, but never openly confronted her. I understood how tricky family dynamics could be. Everything shifted with one announcement. One Sunday dinner, Victoria burst into the room, waving a newspaper. MTech Solutions is searching for a new CEO. This is my opportunity. I nearly choked on my wine. While it was true we were looking for a CEO, the search was highly selective. Are you applying? Michael asked, surprise evident in his voice. Of course. After 2 decades in middle management, it's time I reached the big leagues, she asserted, then turned to me, saying, Emily, could you put in a good word for me? Though I suspect your recommendation won't hold much sway, kept my expression neutral. I'll see what I can do. Don't bother. She waved off. I've already called in favors. The board will be impressed by my... Her resume was loaded with embellishments, and I called out each one. Her fabricated accomplishments and supposed connections unraveled swiftly under scrutiny. I think we're done here, I concluded. Your application is disqualified due to misrepresentation. You can't do this, she exclaimed. This is personal. No, it's professional, I countered. But since you mentioned personal matters, yes, I've tolerated your condescension and insults for months. This isn't revenge, Victoria. It's accountability. She stormed out, muttering threats about exposing me to Michael. Go ahead, I thought, reaching for my phone. It was time Michael found out the truth. Mom just called me crying, Michael said when he entered my office, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. He said, you're her boss, Emily. What's happening? I gestured for him to take a seat, taking a deep breath. Michael, there's a lot I need to clarify. I haven't been entirely honest about who I am. I didn't want to complicate things between us, but now it's unavoidable. Can I show you something? Minutes later, Michael stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, his gaze sweeping over the stunning view of the city and the nameplate on my desk. Emily Walker, founder and CEO. He turned to a wall adorned with awards and newspaper articles highlighting MTech Solutions. So, you're not a secretary? He said, his voice composed. No, I'm not, I confessed, standing next to him. I founded MTech when I was 23, the company your mom mocked me for working at. I built it from the ground up. Hurt flickered in his eyes as he asked, why would you conceal something like this? Why lie? I wanted someone to see me, not my bank balance, I answered. Do you know how many people have attempted to get close to me because of my wealth or status? I desired to experience love for who I am, not for what I possess. Michael sighed, his expression softening. I get that, but you allowed my mother to treat you terribly. You could have put a stop to this months ago, and what would that have achieved? I queried. Proving her preoccupation with status right, that wealth defines someone's worth? I had no desire to play her game. Michael ran a hand through his hair. You're right. I should have defended you. I failed you on that front. Before I could respond, the office door burst open, and Victoria stormed in, dragging her husband George behind her. Her face was inflamed with fury. There she is, the liar, the manipulator. George, ever the silent observer, approached. Emily, this feels inappropriate, using your position to reject Victoria over personal disputes. I recorded the entire interview. I cut him off with the press of a button. Victoria's stumbling responses filled the room. This wasn't personal. Your wife lied on her application and misrepresented her qualifications. The board reached their decision based on facts. Victoria's face twisted with fury. You think you've triumphed? Just wait until everyone hears about this. The so-called genius CEO who pretended to be a secretary just to worm her way into our family. Mom, stop! Michael's voice thundered, silencing the room. Just stop! Do you hear yourself? You're embarrassing us all. Embarrassing! She's the liar here! Victoria spat. No, Michael stated firmly. Emily lied about one thing, her job. You've lied about everything else. Our family status, your connections, your accomplishments. It's all a facade. And I'm done enabling it. Victoria's mouth dropped open, and George gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Let it go, Victoria, he murmured. This has gone too far. This isn't over, she hissed as he guided her out. You'll regret this, both of you. As the door slammed shut, silence enveloped the office. Michael turned to me, weariness and determination etched on his face. I'm sorry for everything my family put you through, but I need to know, where do we go from here? Before I could answer, my assistant came through the intercom. Miss Walker, sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Patterson is in the lobby causing a scene. Security is asking how to proceed. Michael and I exchanged a glance. We'll handle it together, he said. I pressed the intercom. Send the security footage to my laptop and stand by. Intervene only if she disrupts business operations. On the screen, we watch. I was already dialing, Mr. Patterson. This is Emily Walker. Your employee, Victoria Patterson, is in my lobby, threatening to disclose confidential client information. Yes, I'll hold. Victoria's voice rang out over the feed. I'll ruin her. She's been poaching our best clients. Just then, a sharp voice cut through the chaos on the screen. Victoria, a composed woman in a suit, approached, flanked by two men. "I'm Susan Chen, legal counsel for Patterson Insurance. You're hereby suspended pending investigation for violation of your non-disclosure agreement and attempted corporate espionage." Victoria stumbled back. "No, you don't understand. We understand perfectly," Susan replied coldly. "Your access to confidential files has been monitored for weeks, and this public outburst has only confirmed our suspicions." Michael watched in stunned silence as his mother was escorted out, her protests fading. "Emily, I didn't know she could do this. It's not your fault," I said gently. "But we need to confront this openly, with your family, with mine, and with ourselves." Michael nodded, his voice steady. Together, as security escorted a shocked Victoria out of the building, Michael turned to me, his brow furrowed. "You knew about her job performance," I admitted. "I discovered it during the merger discussions. I planned to assist her transition into a role that suited her skills better. That's partly why I kept my identity hidden. I needed to understand the situation thoroughly before making decisions that would affect your family." Mr. Patterson nearby shook his head with a faint smile. "Always thinking of others, Emily. It's one of the reasons I agreed to the merger initially." He straightened his jacket and added, "Don't worry about Victoria. We'll manage the legal aspects discreetly." After he left, stillness settled in the office. Michael sat across from me, gazing out the window, lost in thought. "I need some time," he finally said. "This is a lot," I nodded, attempting to keep my voice calm. "Take all the time you need." At the door, he paused, glancing back at me. "For what it's worth, I fell in love with Emily the secretary. Knowing you're Emily the CEO doesn't change that. It just means I have more to discover about you." After he departed, I remained at my desk, watching the city lights flicker on as night descended. My phone buzzed. George's message read, "My father and Victoria's home devastated. She understands what she's lost. When you're prepared, we should talk, all of us. Families shouldn't end this way." In the ensuing week, I immersed myself in work, granting Michael and his family the space they needed. Meanwhile, the media caught wind of Victoria's public meltdown. Corporate espionage involving two merging companies was too scandalous to overlook. Thankfully, PR teams from both companies managed to contain the fallout. One late evening, while reviewing merger documents, my assistant buzzed in. "Miss Walker, the Patterson family is here to see you." They entered as a unit. George, leading with calm authority, Michael with an unreadable expression, and finally, Victoria, her usual poise replaced by a tentative vulnerability, dressed in simple business attire. A stark contrast to her typically designer wardrobe. "Emily," George began, his tone measured, "we need to talk. All of us." Victoria stepped forward, wringing her hands. "I've been in therapy this past week, intensive sessions. Losing the promotion broke me, everything I constructed my identity on. My importance, my connections, it all crumbled. You try to hold on by grasping at more," I replied softly. She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "When I saw the CEO position, I convinced myself I deserved it, that others were holding me back. Then learning the truth about you shattered what was left." "Mom," Michael said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "There's more. You must tell her." Victoria took a shaky breath. "I've battled for years with shopping addiction, fabricating stories about our family's status. It all began when George's business faced difficulties a decade ago. Instead of confronting reality, I created a fantasy. It felt easier than admitting we weren't who I pretended us to be." George spoke up, regret heavy in his voice. "And I enabled it. I thought maintaining appearances would keep us afloat, but it only made things worse." "The merger, will it still happen?" Victoria asked. I nodded. "Yes, while your actions hurt both companies, they don't erase 2 decades of service. The merger includes a retirement package for long-term employees. It's hers if she desires it." Victoria broke down, finally allowing her carefully constructed walls to crumble. "I'm sorry, Emily, for everything, for how I treated you." Michael stepped beside me and took my hand. "We've all learned something," he said. "Mom about honesty, Dad about enabling, me about standing up for what's right, and Emily about trusting people with the truth." Fast forward 2 months. Victoria quietly retired. The merger proceeded smoothly, and she found new purpose in volunteering for a financial literacy program to help others avoid her past mistakes. At her wedding the following spring, she delivered a heartfelt speech that reduced many to tears. "A year ago, I believed status and appearances were everything, but my daughter-in-law taught me that true worth lies in how you treat others. Emily, thank you for giving our family a second chance, not because you're a CEO, but because you're a compassionate human being." Michael squeezed my hand under the table. We had rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of truth. moving past lies and facades. Looking around, I saw our merged family, George conversing with my father about business, Victoria assisting my mother with flower arrangements, our employees mingling with relief. Success, I realized, meant nothing without people to share it with. Happy? Michael whispered. Very, I replied with a grin, though I do sometimes miss that secretary desk. He chuckled. Well, you did say your assistant is going on maternity leave. Don't tempt me, I teased. I might just go undercover again. Victoria overheard and joined in the laughter. Finally free from pretense, she discovered something far more precious than status. Peace with who she truly was. As the celebration continued, I reflected on that first accidental coffee spill. It had led to this very moment, proving that sometimes life's greatest blessings arrive disguised as chaos. Looking around at those I cherished, I realized success isn't measured in money or titles. It is measured in second chances, hard truths, and the bravery to be authentically oneself. My ex cheated on me and then claimed to everyone that I assaulted her, but she didn't know I had all her text messages. At 24 years old, I finally summoned the courage to ask Kate, also 24, out after years of quietly liking her. To my surprise, she said yes. And by our third date, we were officially a couple. For months, everything felt perfect. We shared interests, rarely argued, and spent our time enjoying each other's company. My family adored her, and hers embraced me warmly. Life seemed to flow effortlessly. With both of us having stable jobs, we enjoyed the freedom to treat each other. Fancy dinners, spontaneous gifts, weekend getaways. It felt like a dream. Kate's parents even told me, "She's so happy with you. We couldn't have wished for a better person in her life." At that time, I believed them. When I was accepted into the Armed Forces Reserve, Kate couldn't have been more supportive. Basic training was grueling, with each day pushing me to my limits both physically and mentally. There were moments I thought I wouldn't survive, but Kate was my anchor. Her texts and calls reminded me why I was doing this. "You've got this," she'd say. "I'm so proud of you." She even attended my graduation, cheering for me louder than anyone else. After basic training, I had to leave for advanced training, which meant being away all summer. Yet, Kate didn't hesitate to encourage me. "This is your future," she told me. "We'll make it work." The summer was tough. Training was demanding, but the worst part was the isolation. I didn't fit in with anyone, and each day felt like a battle to keep pushing forward. My self-esteem plummeted, but Kate always made sure I didn't feel alone. She called me nearly every night, reminding me why I was there and expressing her pride. Her words kept me grounded, and when the course ended, I ranked in the top 5 of my class. When I returned home, I expected things to resume exactly where we left off. But I couldn't have been more mistaken. Coming home should have been the happiest moment, yet something felt off. Kate didn't greet me with her usual warmth. Initially, I thought she just needed time to adjust. After all, I had been gone for months. However, the more I tried to reconnect, the more I sensed something was wrong. It began subtly. She mentioned I wasn't as spontaneous as before. While she'd laugh at jokes, it felt insincere, and if I didn't laugh back, she'd get upset and say, "You're so serious these days." I didn't grasp what she meant, but I put in more effort to make her happy. Then the fight started. Small arguments over trivial matters like what to have for dinner, how I reacted to her teasing, or whether we should go out or stay in. She claimed I was dismissive and couldn't take a joke anymore. At that time, I didn't realize how much the summer had altered me. I was quieter, more anxious, and just wanted the comfort of home. In contrast, Kate desired the excitement we had experienced before. One evening, we were meant to go out with her friends, but at the last moment, I backed out, saying I wasn't feeling up to it. She sighed, grabbed her purse, and left without a goodbye. That night, she didn't return until late, and when I questioned her about it the next day, she shrugged it off. "You didn't want to come, so I had fun without you." I felt like I was losing her, but didn't know how to remedy it. My anxiety only exacerbated the situation. Every conversation felt like I was treading on eggshells. I second-guessed everything I said, fearing it might spark another argument. By the time our anniversary arrived, I realized we were barely holding on. The turning point came when a small misunderstanding escalated into a shouting match. I can't even remember what initiated it, but the argument spiraled out of control. "I can't do this anymore," she said, tears in her eyes. "Maybe we need a break." I didn't protest. I thought some time apart might help, but the silence was unbearable. 3 days later, Kate texted, "I miss you. Can we talk?" I agreed, hoping we could resolve things. For weeks, we kept our distance, texting daily and attempting to mend what was broken. When we finally got back together, it felt different. Every interaction felt strained, as if we were forcing something that had already slipped away. Then she started mentioning someone new, a friend from school named John. At first, John was just a name, casually mentioned by Kate. "He's helping me with a project," or "we grabbed coffee after class." I didn't think anything of it. She'd always been friendly, and I had no reason to doubt her. However, as time went on, His name popped up more frequently. "He's just a friend," she'd say with a light laugh. When I finally asked her about it, I wanted to trust her, so I let it go. Yet, something about the way she smiled when she spoke of him, or how she brightened at a text notification, began gnawing at me. The distance between us continued to grow. Whenever we were together, Kate seemed preoccupied, glued to her phone or brushing off my attempts to engage. If I asked her what was wrong, she'd roll her eyes and say I was imagining things. I started to doubt myself, wondering if I was being paranoid. One night, we had plans for me to stay over after work. When I arrived, I was surprised to find John sitting on the couch with her, laughing at something on his phone. Kate looked up and smiled awkwardly. "Oh, hey, John just dropped by to say hello." He left soon after, standing up to give me a polite nod. I didn't say anything, but the way Kate avoided my gaze told me everything I needed to know. After he departed, Kate seemed distant and hardly spoke to me, her focus entirely on her phone. Finally, I found the courage to ask her, "What's going on between us?" She hesitated, then sighed. "I don't think this is working anymore." Her words hit me like a punch in the gut, but on some level, I had been anticipating them. "So that's it?" I asked. She nodded. "I think it's for the best." We mutually agreed to break up the next day. Since it was late, she said I could stay the night. "It's not like I hate you," she added. "I still care about you." That night, Kate's behavior was peculiar. She was fixated on her phone, tilting the screen away whenever I glanced over. Normally, she didn't mind if I saw her texting friends, but now it felt like she was hiding state secrets. "What's so private?" I finally inquired. "It's nothing," she snapped. "Just drop it." I didn't press further, but my suspicions continued to grow. After she fell asleep, my curiosity got the better of me. I knew her passcode, so I unlocked her phone and began scrolling through her messages. What I discovered shattered me. Hundreds of texts exchanged between her and John, filled with excitement about finally being able to get together now that she was single, and mocking me for not realizing it sooner. Each word pierced my heart like a knife. I hadn't realized I was crying until Kate stirred awake. When she saw me, she flew into a rage. "How dare you go through my phone?" she screamed, snatching it from my hands. I couldn't even respond. The pain was too fresh. I just gathered my belongings and left while she yelled after me, hurling insults I never imagined would come from her. By the time I reached home, it was early morning. I collapsed onto my bed and cried until I had nothing left, but the worst was still looming. The day after leaving Kate's place, I began receiving messages, angry, hateful texts from her friends and even her family. Initially, I thought it was just fallout from our breakup, but then the accusations started rolling in. "She told us what you did," one message read. "You're disgusting." I was baffled until the pieces began to align. Kate had told everyone that I had forced myself on her, claiming I had tried to get with her one last time before I left, leaving her traumatized. She even framed herself as the bigger person for not pressing charges, because she didn't want to ruin my life. I was in disbelief. It didn't matter that her claims were false. The damage was done. Her words spread like wildfire among her circle. Friends who had always treated me kindly turned cold. Her family, who once welcomed me with open arms, now regarded me as a pariah. But what terrified me most was the potential fallout for my career. Being in the Armed Forces Reserve, even a hint of such an accusation could obliterate my reputation and future. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart sank, expecting a call from my commanding officer. Yet no charges were filed, and no police showed up at my door. It was all rumors and whispers crafted to tarnish my image, without crossing a legal boundary. She knew exactly what she was doing. For weeks, I lived in fear. I avoided social media, petrified of what I might uncover. Friends I believed I could depend on stopped returning my calls. At work, I kept my head down, hoping the storm would blow over. But it didn't quell the gnawing anxiety that one day everything I had fought for would crumble. Months later, out of the blue, Kate messaged me. She began with pleasantries, acting as if nothing had transpired. Then came the apology. "I'm sorry for everything," she wrote. "I know I took things too far." Initially, I thought she was confessing to her lies. But then she added, "I just had to protect myself. You know my reputation was on the line." She admitted it, acknowledged her lies, but refused to come clean publicly. "I have too much to lose," she said. "You wouldn't want to ruin me, would you?" Her arrogance infuriated me, but I stayed composed. I screenshot everything, every text, every apology, every excuse. I documented it all. Though I didn't know how I would use it yet, I understood the need to be prepared. Kate's messages didn't cease over the following months. She fell into a predictable cycle, complaining about her issues with John, how he wasn't the man she envisioned, reminiscing about our relationship and how much she missed me. Then, when her situation with John improved, she would block me and begin spreading more lies about me online. Each time it happened, I added to my collection of screenshots. I didn't retaliate. I remained silent, waiting for the opportune moment. When that moment arrived, I was ready. After months of enduring Kate's antics, I decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to allow her to rewrite the narrative any longer. Every screenshot, every message, everything I had accumulated was about to serve its purpose. I made multiple copies of the most damning messages, her admissions of lying about the assault, her cruel remarks about me throughout our relationship, her complaints regarding John. I compiled everything into a neat package, printed multiple sets, and purchased a stack of manila envelopes, labeling them with the names of everyone significant in Kate's life: her parents, her grandparents, her best friends, her co-workers, and even her professors. I ensured there was no way anyone could misconstrue the texts as fake. The hardest part was mailing them. My hands trembled as I dropped the envelopes into the mailbox, and part of me wondered if I was going too far. But then, I remembered everything she had done. The lies, the humiliation, the months filled with fear and anxiety. She didn't deserve my silence any longer. Within weeks, the results came flooding in. Some of the same individuals who had previously sent me hateful messages were now reaching out to apologize. Her parents contacted me first. "We're so sorry for what she did," her mom wrote. "This isn't how we raised her. Please don't take legal action." Her dad sent a different message, expressing their shame and promising to speak with Kate, begging me to let it go. I told them I would think about it, although I had no intention of pursuing anything legally. I simply wanted the truth to be revealed. On the other hand, Kate was furious. She bombarded me with angry texts, calling me every name imaginable. "How could you betray me like this?" she wrote. "You've ruined my life. You bastard." I didn't reply. Instead, I read each message with a satisfied grin before blocking her. The aftermath for Kate was devastating. She dropped out of school, lost her job, and her social circle crumbled. People who once supported her turned away. Even John left once everything came to light. Last I heard, she was living with her parents, trying to piece her life back together. As for me, life gradually improved. Therapy helped me work through my anxiety and trauma, allowing me to concentrate on my career and hobbies. I even met someone new, Jode, who was everything Kate wasn't: kind, supportive, and honest. Over time, our friendship blossomed into a relationship. We've been together for 2 years now, and I couldn't be happier. Occasionally, I hear snippets about Kate through mutual connections. Apparently, she attempted to reach out to me recently, but I shut that down immediately. Jode knows everything about my past with Kate and has been my rock throughout it all. Reflecting on everything, I have no regrets about my actions. Kate tried to ruin me, and I simply returned the favor.
5 years into our marriage, my husband unexpectedly filed for divorce without any explanation. However, I unintentionally overheard a startling conversation with his friend that disclosed the truth. My husband, 32, and I, a 30-year-old female, tied the knot 5 years ago after dating for about 2 years. I was completely infatuated with him. So when he proposed, I didn't hesitate to say yes. At that time, he was a struggling actor trying to find work while I was employed as a surgeon, which meant I covered nearly all the household expenses. I didn't mind at all, as I was eager for him to pursue his dreams and was more than willing to manage all the bills. He earned less than half of what I made, often cast only as an extra in various scenes. Yet he persevered. Recently, he landed a minor role in a feature film, and I was ecstatic for him. He had approximately 10 to 15 minutes of screen time, which was a significant achievement for him, and I was overjoyed about it. This development occurred a couple of months ago, with shooting for his role scheduled to begin in a few weeks. Then, everything changed for me just 5 days ago, when my husband unexpectedly handed me divorce papers. I was completely blindsided, as I had never imagined he would want a divorce. He seemed content with our relationship, and I was happy with him too. This sudden change took me by surprise. He explained that he no longer felt the same way about me and wanted to dedicate more time and energy to his career now that serious offers were finally coming in. He insisted it was just the beginning for him, and he wanted a clean break, implying he couldn't continue to be weighed down by the burdens of his past life, which apparently included me. I was in disbelief that he was saying all this, especially considering everything I had done for us, the sacrifices I had made, and the countless times I prioritized his dreams over my own. I must have cried for hours that day, pleading with him for a second chance at our marriage, but he was resolute, telling me there was nothing I could do to fix the situation, and that he simply didn't feel anything for me anymore, which was why it was best for us to separate. He then gathered his belongings and left me heartbroken. That was 5 days ago, and I felt utterly lost for the following 4 days. I didn't even go to work out of sheer depression, wishing desperately to wake from this terrible nightmare. Then yesterday, I received a call from him asking if I could drop off some of his more formal clothes at his friend's house where he was currently staying, as he had a meeting tomorrow. I agreed without hesitation, viewing this as an opportunity to see him in person and attempt to convince him to return. Desperate for a sliver of hope, I consequently went to his friend's place. Upon arrival, I noticed the door was ajar, and I could hear my husband chatting with his friend inside. I thought about knocking, but paused when I heard his friend ask him why he even married me in the first place, if he had no intention of staying with me. This piqued my curiosity, prompting me to quietly eavesdrop on their conversation and seek some answers. It appeared they had been discussing me prior, and I had just caught them at an inopportune moment. though it felt like the perfect time for me to learn the truth. Before replying to his friend, my husband chuckled and said that the sole reason he married me was to use me as a stepping stone in his career. Beyond that, he claimed there was no love for me in his heart, and revealed that he had cheated on me numerous times throughout our marriage with various women he met on set or at parties. I nearly gasped aloud, but managed to restrain myself, wanting to hear every detail of what my husband had to say. He continued, explaining how he had met me through a mutual friend who informed him that I was the daughter of a well-respected dental surgeon, which was true. My father is one of the best dentists in the state. My husband was also aware that a very popular actor happened to be a frequent client of my father's, having learned this from some friends of his in the industry. I can't name names for obvious reasons, but it's an undeniable fact. Piece by piece, everything began to click as he elaborated how asking me out had been a last-ditch effort to salvage his acting dreams, with my wealth and naivety simply sweetening the deal. For 5 years, he had feigned love, all while eagerly awaiting a chance to meet my father's famous client. That golden opportunity arose at my father's 50th wedding anniversary party about 5 months ago, when he invited many friends and, of course, his most notable client, who also happened to be a close friend of his. Somehow, my husband managed to strike up a conversation with him at the event, charm him, and secure an exchange of numbers. Despite my current contempt for him, I acknowledge that my husband possesses a certain charm when it suits him, so I was not astonished he could pull it off. However, it deeply hurt to realize this was the reason he wasted 5 years, not just his life, but mine as well, putting me through unfathomable heartbreak. To add insult to injury, I was inadvertently the reason he secured this role, as the film's director had taken him on at the client's recommendation. I had essentially contributed to my own downfall, and I was the one being cheated on and poised to face a divorce. I felt an overwhelming urge to confront him, to walk in and give him a piece of my mind. But I maintained my composure, returned to my car, and drove home. This unfolded yesterday afternoon, providing me ample time to simmer in my rage and plot my revenge against this selfish monster. Once home, I tried meditating briefly to calm my furious mind, fearing I might impulsively lash out if I didn't rein in my emotions. I devised multiple plans to retaliate against him. Otherwise, I could only think of calling my dad's client, demanding he pull strings to have my husband removed from the film. However, I was uncertain if that would even work, as this was a professional matter. And I doubted anyone would care about my input. The client had known me since I was a college student. While we weren't particularly close, he certainly had a better understanding of me than my husband did. Ultimately, I figured it was worth a shot, and called him in the evening after discussing it with my dad. I hadn't yet confided in anyone about the impending divorce. Not even my family, because I believed I could still turn the situation around. This was the first time I was acknowledging the possibility of our separation, so I was understandably anxious. After a few calls, his assistant connected me, and after some awkward small talk, I blurted out my request, and didn't stop until I divulged everything I needed to convey. I informed him that my husband had been unfaithful and had essentially manipulated both me and my dad's connections to secure this film role, asserting that in any reasonable world, he would leverage his influence to see my husband dismissed from the project. I spilled this all in one breath, and I was certain the client felt as uncomfortable with my confession as I did. After a tension-filled silence, he promised to look into it before hanging up, and I thanked him profusely. Naturally, I was mortified by what had transpired, but it was done. All I could do now was wait for a response either from him or from my husband. Approximately 2 hours later, around 10 p.m., I received a flood of frantic calls from my husband, and it hit me that he must have been fired by then. I was in disbelief over the situation and promptly sent a gratitude text to the man behind this outcome. There hadn't actually been any formal contract, just a casual agreement, so I figured it wasn't particularly complicated for him. He texted me back, even wishing me well for the future, which I appreciated. It was a genuinely kind gesture that somewhat restored my faith in humanity. I ignored all of my husband's calls and texts, switched off my phone, and went to bed without a care in the world. In fact, I likely enjoyed the best sleep I've ever had, and I'm not exaggerating. However, this morning, just hours after waking up and preparing for work, I heard my husband shouting for me from outside my door, pleading for me to let him in. I had no intention of opening up, telling him I needed to leave for work and that he had to go. He refused to relent, insisting we ought to talk, if only one last time before I completely sever ties. Eventually, boredom set in from his persistence, so I relented and let him inside, warning him not to squander my time. He promptly sank to his knees, begging and claiming he had made a mistake, professing that I was the only woman he had ever loved and needed just one more chance. But I was now fully aware of his acting abilities and felt zero sympathy for him. I allowed him to sob for a few minutes before inquiring how his film role had panned out. I ensured my tone came off as derisive because, let's be honest, that's precisely what I intended. I sensed his surprise initially, but it quickly morphed into realization
as he grasped that I had been the catalyst behind his loss of the opportunity he coveted. He erupted in anger, screaming in my face that I had ruined his life and that he would ensure I paid for it.
I didn't hold back either, yelling back that he had damned 5 years of my own life and that he deserved this, and worse. We must have argued for around 5 minutes, but eventually he appeared to break down, understanding that no amount of shouting would restore what he had lost, not the film role, and certainly not the comfortable life he had led with me. He had no one to blame but himself for his mess. I almost felt pity for him, but then, even while he was tearful, he threatened to take everything in the divorce and ensure I ended up on the streets. Such bold words quickly extinguished any sympathy I had felt, and I calmly instructed him to leave my house. He complied, still crying, but muttering curses under his breath. I decided to skip work again today, as the emotional toll of events had been heavy, leaving me in no fit state of mind. AET for ruining my husband's career just before its potential rise because he had exploited me for years and had also been unfaithful. Update 1. I finally confided in my friends and family about the divorce, and they were as blindsided as I had been when my husband initially dropped the news. I shared what I had overheard at his friend's house, and they were all so disgusted that they affirmed my retaliatory actions were nothing compared to what he had put me through. Naturally, my dad was furious that his son-in-law used both me and him to achieve his goals. He even expressed a desire to confront my husband physically, but I managed to calm him down. I'm relieved that others believe my actions were entirely justified because his deeds were incredibly cruel, shattering my faith in men and marriage forever. I truly think he deserved to have everything he worked for taken away. After all, while he had invested years into his career, I poured an equal amount of time and a staggering amount of money into our marriage. If he could single-handedly dismantle our relationship, then I don't see why me destroying his career should be a significant issue for him. Yet, he seems to feel wronged, claiming he lost an opportunity due to me and continues to pester me online, requesting I retract my statements and somehow assist him in regaining his role. I've been blocking his accounts, but he's desperate enough to create new ones, so I'm contemplating going off social media entirely. I can't fathom why he feels entitled to contact me after everything he's done, but eventually I believe he'll realize he's finished and that there's no way back from this. His threats of ruining me in the divorce seem to be nothing but empty words. As both of us know, he's incapable of doing anything to me. Update 2. I deactivated my social media accounts and blocked my husband a few days ago, but now I'm considering changing my phone number as well. Last night, I received around 70 to 80 spam calls from various numbers, and it's beyond irritating. Every few minutes, my phone buzzes with yet another unfamiliar number. I know it's him behind this chaos. I even tried calling him to request he stop, warning him that these antics could impact the settlement. I was bluffing, of course. There is no settlement to discuss, but I used it as leverage to pressure him into ceasing the harassment, though he adamantly insisted he had nothing to do with it. I could tell he was lying by his tone, and that made it even more infuriating. As I began to tear up, he hinted that the calls might cease by some miracle, one that involved him getting his role back. I ended up yelling a few choice curse words at him over the phone before hanging up. I still haven't turned my phone back on. I'm using my laptop to access the internet right now. I'll only reactivate it after acquiring a new number, which I hope will prevent him from bothering me again. As for the divorce, it's clear I won't contest it, and we're set to appear in court shortly. I don't understand why he's acting out regardless of our impending court date, especially since he's acutely aware that I could make things difficult for him if I chose to. Fortunately for him, I'm not inclined to do so. I did what needed to be done, and now my intent is to let the matter settle smoothly without further conflict. I truly believe clinging to my anger and allowing his existence to disturb me will hinder my ability to move on from this ordeal. Hence, I want this all to be behind me. I don't care what happens to him anymore. Whether he succeeds or fails in the future, I just want nothing to do with him going forward. Update 3. The day after tomorrow, my husband and I are scheduled to appear in court, and shockingly, he couldn't just allow that to happen without attempting something crazed and irrational. I had changed my numbers, ensuring he couldn't reach me anymore. And with my social media accounts inactive, I felt confident that I had outsmarted him. However, I misjudged just how deranged he truly is. Last evening, as I was about to get into my car, my husband appeared out of nowhere, entering the seat beside me. He immediately locked the doors from the inside, and before I could even comprehend what was happening, I grabbed my purse to retrieve my pepper spray, but it was too late. He had already snatched it away and tossed my purse into the back seat. I was terrified and prepared to beg or do whatever he wanted me to at that point. Calmly, which only increased my fear, he explained that he didn't require much from me, merely that I call my dad's actor client, recant what I had said, and ensure he received his film role back. This seemed straightforward enough. However, my phone was in my purse, so I told him I needed to grab it for the call. I may not be foolish, but my husband sure was. Once he passed me the purse, I seized my pepper spray and emptied half of it on him in one go. My eyes were watering and stinging terribly, impairing my vision, but his condition was worse as he struggled for breath after the spray hit him. I unlocked the doors, pushed him out of the car, and sped away, leaving him coughing on the pavement. I managed to get away from the parking lot, driving a short distance from my workplace before I exited my car, unable to see adequately and definitely not in a state to drive home. Thankfully, a cab appeared, and the driver, sensing something was off, offered to take me to the nearest police station. Without a second thought, I accepted. The next couple of hours are a blur, as I was still reeling from the events in the parking lot. I was aware my husband was unstable, but this level of madness surpassed anything I had prepared for. I found it hard to fathom that I had once been blissfully married to this man, and that he was now putting me through such turmoil. Fortunately, he was arrested since he couldn't flee the scene due to his reaction to the spray. When they brought him into the station, his face still bore signs of redness and swelling, which made me feel validated once I pressed charges against him. I left the station but chose to go to my parents' house instead. Honestly, the idea of being alone didn't sit well with me, and I haven't ventured out since. My parents have been incredibly supportive, treating me like their little girl again, which provides me some solace. My dad assured me he would ensure that my husband receives a fitting punishment, and this time, I'm not stopping him. Some men need to learn they can't bully women and just walk away unscathed. Update 4. Hey everyone, it's been a few weeks since my last update, and I'm pleased to share that my husband was sentenced to 3 months in prison, along with a hefty fine for his actions against me. While I wish he received a harsher penalty, this does seem fair under the circumstances. As for the divorce, we expedited the process, and it's set to conclude far sooner than most divorce cases due to everything that transpired. He's also not entitled to any financial compensation, which is a huge relief for me. I've sold our house and even my car, ensuring there's no way for him to track me down again. I've secured a position at a new and better hospital, much closer to my parents' place, making commuting much easier. I'm still living with them since they adamantly refuse to let me return to living on my own, even though my husband currently can't reach me. But I appreciate their protective nature. Honestly, I still haven't fully processed the shock of everything. I've begun therapy to help navigate my emotions. I recognize that healing will take time and can't be expected to occur overnight. Although I strive to move beyond thoughts of him, I often find myself reflecting on the years we shared. It's hard to accept that it was all built on lies, even though some moments felt genuine. Whenever I find myself reminiscing, I focus on what transpired afterward, the incident in the parking lot, and that helps ground me in reality. I understand these wounds won't heal quickly, but I'm taking it day by day, hoping I'll be okay soon. I vow that the day I find closure couldn't arrive soon enough.